All right, we're going to get this session kicked off. This is How to Evolve Gun Rights in 2017. Today we are joined by Paul Vallone, President of Grassroots North Carolina, Representative Chris Millis of Pender County, and Anthony Roulette of the NRA. And they will be taking turns speaking to start off with.
Thank you. Thank you very much for attending. I know we have a lot of competition today in terms of wonderful topics at the CLC. This is a wonderful venue that Civitas has set up. I just told Francis it's the CPAC of North Carolina, and it's absolutely crucial for, I guess, sharing information and coordinating the advancement of traditional American values. I have, my title for today's agenda is Defending Gun Rights in a Toxic Political Environment. Essentially, before I begin, I would like to give you a little quote from Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. Now, based on some of what you may have heard at lunch, the good news is the Republicans in some ways are advancing a traditional conservative agenda. And, in fact, you won in November, right? Yes. Well, maybe not. Did you really? My good friend Tim Daughtry, who has given seminars here in the past, he writes for Town Hall, and he authored Waking the Sleeping Giant, How Mainstream Americans Can Beat Liberals at Their Own Game. He argues that one of the problems we conservatives have is that when we win, we go home. After all, we don't want to control people, we just want to be left alone. We want to go back to our family, our jobs, our lives. And we're willing to let the people we elected take care of the rest. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Now, in 23 years of running gun rights organizations, that's exactly what I've seen. After Sandy Hook, when we had federal gun control on the table, I couldn't sign up members fast enough. Literally, our website went down a couple of times with too much traffic. When we win, however, like in November, people forget we exist. They go home. Meanwhile, the left doesn't go home. Win or lose, leftists continue their generations-long march toward their communist agenda. And when they lose to the mainstream Americans in the political arena, they fall back to their ironclad control of the media, the courts, the cultural institutions, and of course, the schools. The leftists won't give up without a fight, and that, of course, is why you've seen the continuing entrenchment against Donald Trump. Given the bitter hate that consumes the left since November, what happened in Alexandria, Virginia, was inevitable. In fact, unfortunately, I think we can rest assured it will not be the last such time. The bottom line is that you can't go home. In particular, here in North Carolina, we have a task for you. Despite this toxic political environment, that task is to help us pass House Bill 746, which has passed in the North Carolina House and now resides in the Senate. I should note that time for this bill is short. Unlike previous sessions, the bill sponsor I'm about to introduce had to go through extraordinary measures to keep this bill alive after the crossover deadline so that we could actually get hearings on it and it wouldn't have died weeks ago. Now, I should note that we also need time, first of all, not only to pass it this year, since I think you will find that Republicans will be loath, or any politician is loath to pass legislation in an election year for fear that somebody will hold them accountable at the ballot box. But, and essentially we're going to need to override a veto by Governor Cooper. So we need ultimately veto-proof majorities, if not on bill passage, at least on the override vote in order to avoid not only having this bill fail, but empowering Roy Cooper. It's never a pretty thing. So, House Bill 746 is the next step in the evolution of personal protection legislation. The bill duplicates policy that has successfully been implemented in no less than 13 other states, specifically Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Kansas, Maine, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. We're not breaking new ground here. Moreover, none of those states have reported negative experiences based on adopting what is now going to be the closest thing we can to constitutional carry. Permitless concealed carry is sweeping the nation, and that's what we're talking about right now. Now, understand that prohibited persons would still be prohibited. If you wouldn't qualify for a concealed handgun permit, you wouldn't qualify to carry concealed. People would still be required to notify law enforcement. So law enforcement shouldn't have a problem with it. Of course, the North Carolina Association of Chiefs of Police does have a problem with it, but then they opposed our original concealed carry bill in 1995 too. In fact, I recall an occasion in front of a Senate Judiciary Committee where the lobbyist for the Chiefs of Police, actually the head of the Chiefs of Police, stood up to testify by saying, if we passed this concealed carry bill, his officers wouldn't know at a traffic stop who was armed. The place broke out in laughter because, of course, anybody could be armed. The presence or absence of a law doesn't determine that. So the bottom line is that House Bill 746 is carefully and narrowly crafted. It doesn't break a lot of new ground, but it does advance our cause in ways that are perhaps more evolutionary, closer to revolutionary. With that, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Representative Chris Millis of Pender County, the primary architect of the bill and the sponsor, along with also Larry Pittman, Michael Speciali, Jay Adams, and Justin Burr. Representative Millis.
Good afternoon. I appreciate you guys taking the time not only to attend this conference, but more importantly to attend this work group meeting. What Paul has shared with you is spot on accurate, that we have a major piece of legislation, House Bill 746, that truly can advance gun rights for law-abiding citizens in our state in a tremendous fashion. And this opportunity is before us. The time or the shot clock is running out to get this bill moved into law. And so I'll describe to you a little bit about what the bill is, because although I did every media interview request that was presented before me, I went on every radio show I had the opportunity to be on, even though that every interview that I could do in front of a camera, I did, the media has, what I believe, purposely tried to sensationalize headlines to drive clicks rather than articulate the truth about what the bill really does. So first and foremost, let me share with you what the bill does not do. The bill does not affect whatsoever anything about the purchasing of a firearm, whether a handgun or a long gun. There's nothing in the bill dealing with purchasing. The bill does not lower the age of which one can carry a firearm. It is existing law that individual who is 18 years old or older can carry a firearm openly in this state. The bill does provide parity that individuals who can carry a firearm openly in this state will be able to carry in those same places, and only in those same places where they can currently carry openly, they'll be able to practically carry a firearm concealed in those same places without having a government mandated permit. But any place outside where they can currently open carry a firearm that they would want to be able to carry concealed, they would still be required to traverse the concealed handgun permit process. So with that said, another misconception, the bill does not do away with the concealed handgun permit process. It is still there, not only for purposes of broader carry, it's also there for purposes of reciprocity, and it's also there for the ease of you all who want to be able to purchase handguns more readily than having to traverse the sheriff's office each time in order to get a pistol purchase permit. So with that said, that is what the bill does in concept. Let me explain to you why that's important. And I gave an example on the House floor of reality of what our current law is and how it gives an unfair advantage to criminals over law-abiding citizens. So you take the instance, say you have a young lady who's graduated college, beginning her career, moves into an apartment complex. She has a run-in with a potential stalker. She notifies law enforcement, they're a phone call away. If that young lady wants to be able to safely holster a handgun in her purse, to practically carry that handgun, she's a lawbreaker until she traverses the entire concealed handgun permit process. You cannot carry a firearm not open to plain sight under current law unless you have a concealed handgun permit. So that young lady, although law enforcement would be a phone call away, for 9 months, 10 months, or a year, however long it would take for her to be able to traverse the concealed handgun permit process, she would be a lawbreaker if she carried that firearm safely holstered in her purse. This bill will allow her to be able to defend herself in places where she can currently carry a firearm openly and to be able to carry that firearm more practically while, if she decides to traverse the whole entire concealed handgun permit process, she can do so, but at least that young lady or young man or whoever it may be, whatever demographic, age group, whatever you want to talk about, they can be able to defend themselves against harm. Because right now, criminals do have an advantage. They have an advantage. They either can see an individual who is open carrying a firearm, and they can either target that individual first, or they can deter against that individual, or they can gamble of whether someone has traversed the concealed handgun permit process, whether their permit's active, whether it's not expired, and they can run those odds, and the odds are it's very limited of an individual who may have received the full-fledged permit. Therefore, if this bill passes, it totally is a paradigm shift in the odds of whether an individual who wants to do harm to you or another, including your loved ones, they'll no longer have any idea of whether you're carrying or not. And I think that's important. Also, too, when I speak about the practicality of carrying a firearm, as you know, I may have a firearm holstered outside of my waistband. That's fine in the summertime, but the moment I put a jacket on, or the moment that winter comes around, I'm a lawbreaker if I don't have a concealed handgun permit or my permit's not in good standing. So this bill is very, as Paul said, crafted very narrowly. It's narrowly tailored. As I speak one-on-one to law enforcement, it usually comes down to either one of two conclusions. Either they were speaking against the bill as reported by the media, a lot of mistruths were put out about the bill, or once the bill is explained to them, then either they have an issue with existing law. For example, I've heard about the aspects of mandated training. Of course, it's existing law that one can carry a firearm openly, starting at the age of 18 in certain places, regardless of government mandated training. So whenever that's explained, either they have an issue with the existing law, that they want to mandate training for all. And as an advocate of training myself, it's very important. And regardless of if you're carrying a handgun, open or concealed, or if you're carrying a long gun, training and safety and knowing the law is of importance. The issue is that when it takes 9 months to a year to be able to practically be able to defend yourself, that's where the problem arises. And as you all know, and as Paul articulated in his opening statements, that we're talking about law-abiding citizens versus criminals that have no regard for the method of carry, aspects of purchasing, anything about where they can have a firearm or not, whether a handgun or long gun. We're talking about the aspects of those who do not want to have a rap sheet, that do want to be law-abiding citizens and want to be in good standing with the law. So House Bill 746 has passed the House. It is currently in the Senate where it's getting due consideration, and we hope that the Senate will move quickly to get this bill through the Senate and hopefully to the governor's desk where he can allow it to go into law, or if he chooses to veto it, then we'll stand ready to override that veto out of respect of the ability for law-abiding citizens to be able to defend themselves and their loved ones with greater liberties. Again, as Paul articulated as well, it's been a long process as there was a number of pro-Second Amendment legislation that was offered beginning in session, and as we begin as bill sponsors, as he articulated, Representative Larry Pittman, Representative Michael Speciali, Representative Justin Burr, Representative Jay Adams, Brenda Turner, a lot of others, we all came together. We all began to work unified behind one bill, which became House Bill 746. And I will make one last note, and hopefully I'm not over my time here, is that Paul did say this is the closest to constitutional carry in terms of legislation that we'll see offered. I personally do not call this bill constitutional carry. It's very close to it, but I believe that with the pistol purchase permit still being in place and within the aspects that you can only carry permitless in areas where you can currently carry openly, I believe it falls short of the full-fledged aspects. But again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You've heard the phrase conservative used in many different ways and forms. So it is very, very, very close to what would be in my heart to constitutional carry, but it may not be, it may not receive that label by what your views are. But I will say that it is the strongest piece of legislation that we were able to get through the House, and we're looking forward to the Senate and moving this sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Representative Millis. And also, I should note there are some other things the bill does as well beyond constitutional carry we can discuss shortly. But before we get to that, NRA Representative Anthony Roulette.
Thanks, Paul. My name is Anthony Roulette. I'm the North Carolina State Liaison for the National Rifle Association. I've been with NRA since 1994, so quite a while. I've been lobbying in North Carolina since about 2003, so I'm pretty familiar with the process here. And I will agree with my fellow panelists that this is a solid piece of legislation and probably the best bill that we're going to be able to get through for this session. Rather than go over all that it does, I will echo some of the things that both Paul and Chris have said. First and foremost, what Paul is saying is very accurate in that when we have success, especially at the ballot box, we tend to see a drop-off in activism. It's a lot easier to get people involved when there are threats at your door. Right now, our big concern is that folks consider November to have been a big victory, both in Washington and in Raleigh with the election results, not so much for the governor's race, but we still have very solid, good pro-gun majorities in both the House and the Senate in North Carolina, which is great. But that said, we still need to make sure that people are active and involved in promoting the pro-gun agenda, and specifically House Bill 746. We've leaped past the first hurdle of getting it through the House. Now it's in the Senate. As I said, time is ticking on the legislative clock, and we need to make sure that folks are getting in contact with their senators, urging them to get this bill moving, get it scheduled for a hearing, get it to the floor. Don't make any big changes to it because, again, what we got out of the House is probably as good as we're going to get, so we don't need to try to make a good bill so much better to the point that we sacrifice, as they say, or we make great the enemy of the good, we make perfection the enemy of the good. The bill as it is a good piece of legislation. Not quite constitutional carry, but it's a great step in that direction. So really, you need to focus on making sure that your senators hear from you. If you've got relationships with your senator, exploit them. Make sure that they understand that this is a key piece of legislation for you, and that it is the key piece of gun-related legislation. It's the only one out there that we're really pushing hard. There are a few other smaller bills out there, but those are already contained in 746. Two bills that passed the House already earlier this year, they're rolled into 746. So we really need to make sure that 746 is the package and that it gets through in a timely fashion. again, as Paul was saying, the concern about activism dropping off after success. I've been with NRA since 1994. I saw at the time, the two greatest recruiters that NRA had for membership were Charlton Heston and Bill Clinton. I didn't think I'd see any better until Barack Obama came along. But in between there, we saw our membership kind of go through little peaks and valleys. Again, as the threats were there, people got active. We need to make sure that now that we've got Donald Trump in the White House and we've got good pro-gun majorities still in the North Carolina House and Senate, our activism and our determination doesn't drop off, because that's when you get complacent, and that's when you don't take advantage of things that you normally would by getting the membership involved, getting pro-gun activists involved. So whatever you do, just remember that now is not the time to be complacent. Now is not the time to sit back on your laurels and think that everything is going great, because things are going great. And I will argue that Donald Trump may be the most pro-Second Amendment president we've ever seen. I won't say that he's a gunny. He's not. His kids are. But from what he has articulated and from what he's been doing, from what he's been stating, it could be argued that he's the strongest Second Amendment president we've ever seen, and that even eclipses guys like the great Ronald Reagan, who some might even say wasn't as pro-gun as he could have been. But so really try to emphasize on staying involved, staying active. And the other issue or the other point that Paul raised that I want to sort of talk about real quick in this bill is the fact that the left goes to their sources and continues their agenda. And one of those places that Paul talked about was in the schools. And this piece of legislation has a great little bit in there that talks about establishing, as you see up there, high school firearm safety and training course. This is how you get the youngsters involved. And it's a program that was the brainchild of Representative Jay Adams. And God bless him, but it got in there, it stayed in there, and I think that it'll help with 746 passage. It'll help to make sure that kids get involved in the shooting sports and understanding what firearms are all about. It's not necessarily a constitutional type of issue. It's more about getting them involved in the mechanics of firearms and the scientific approach. So that is one thing one area where we can combat the left by making sure that 746 goes through, especially in North Carolina, and hopefully we'll see something like that spread out nationwide, and we can give Representative Adams all the credit for that. So that's what I'm going to say. I think you guys might have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns, so I'll let y'all pepper us with what you got.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Anthony. We appreciate that. Basically, we have a petition for passage of House Bill 746. Also, there's some literature over there. We need you to contact legislators, as Anthony noted. There are some key legislators on that contact sheet, people who are dealing with the bill right now that need to hear from you, okay? These are people whose opinions we need to swing that are crucial to getting this bill out to through committee and out to the floor. And the message we're partially delivering is, please don't weaken the bill. We want to make the minimum number of changes to the bill so that we can send it back over to the House, get a concurrence vote, and get it onto the governor's desk where he probably will veto it and then override the veto, okay? So sometime soon, pay attention to our alerts. After this bill makes it through the Senate, we're going to be talking about who to focus on in terms of those who may have voted against it in order, from the Republican Party, in order to ensure that we can override a gubernatorial veto. So please pick up the literature when you are done there. The only other thing I would note is the other things that House Bill 746 does. It keeps the permit system intact, as Representative Millis said. It also cleans up the permitting issuance process. We've had problems in a number of counties, especially Mecklenburg, some in Durham, Forsyth, Guilford, on delays in processing applications. In some cases, it has taken as long as a year to process an application that in theory is supposed to be done in 45 days. Okay? So we have sheriffs who are actually actively obstructing the issuing process, sheriffs who are misinterpreting the requirement that you have no physical or mental infirmity that prevents the safe handling of a handgun. In some cases, I'm getting reports of people saying, oh, I took antidepressants in 1985 after the death of my wife, and now they're denying me a concealed handgun permit. Or I had a medical issue in Iraq, okay, and they've decided that I can't have a concealed handgun permit, and these people are forced now, if they can afford it, to spend $500 or more on a lawyer to try and get that denial overturned. So this would actually codify, okay, what constitutes a person who's ineligible due to mental illness, okay? And it would allow it would require the sheriff to demonstrate that you have an ongoing and diagnosed mental condition that would prevent you from safely handling a handgun, as opposed to some vague definition that's currently law. It also narrows the definition of educational property, since if you're not aware of it, if you have a gun in your car right now and under certain circumstances you drive down Hillsborough Street, you might be a felon. Okay, simply for driving down Hillsborough because it bisects the NC State campus. And there are any number of places in the state where that is also true. So this would narrow the definition of educational property to exclude those public thoroughfares and to exclude your church, which also could be educational property, subjecting you to prosecution if they happen to hold, let's say, a preschool during the week, even though the school's not in session. So it does a lot of good things even beyond constitutional carry, and I think we don't normally promote legislation that benefits small groups of people, like, say, legislators, unless it's in a great bill that has other stuff for us. But I would think the legislators right now would be particularly concerned about the legislator carry provision, given the recent events. And then, as Anthony mentioned, it establishes the high school training, and it also narrows and codifies that ancient common law charge of going armed to the terror of the people, since right now it's being misused in some jurisdictions. If you walk down openly in a street in some places, somebody calls the cops and they charge you with going armed to the terror of the people, even though I think it's State v. Dawson and some of the other Supreme Court decisions have determined that that really doesn't apply. Going armed to the terror of the people should only apply if you're actually actively brandishing it or threatening someone.